Greetings, folks. I'm going to give you this extract of the Jungian definition of NE. Then I'll move on to my own. And these will be the slides. And I'll show you how these become relevant, these square melons. Right then, so I'll just read this through in case you're on a small device. So this is about extroverted intuition. Oh, it's just all the NE. Intuition, extroverted intuition, is an attitude of expectancy, vision, and penetration. So you could probably see that at the whole type level with the NE DOMs, which are the collaborator rational, the NTP, and the collaborator idealist, NFP. But only from the subsequent result can it be established how much of what was seen was actually in the object. Now, the reason I've highlighted that is I make this big thing about all the extroverting functions. The reason I call it extroverting rather than extroverted is that extroverted is past tense, but it's an ongoing process. Someone is extroverting his or her attention into the world of possibilities. So that's where this is the one where I make an effort to prove that NE is empirical. Yeah, and I'll get into that later. And even from here with Jung, it's but only from subsequent result can it be established how much of what was seen was actually in the object. And I can give some examples where there is an empirical basis to NE. So all the extroverting functions are empirical, and it's useful to think of those functions as empirical. It helps with definitions, and it lines up with the Kersey types, which are sort of described and shown without using functions. And so with the Kersey types match the Jungian types, it sort of gives us a framework for how to define the functions. Then it's like, okay, this matches the Kersey model as well. So I'll just read this bit out underneath. Sensation directs attention to the physical surface. Well, sensory instincting, Carl. Listen to Van der Hoop. Attention to the physical surface, to the very things around which, very things round and beyond which intuition tries to peer. Getting a bit metaphorical there. Intuition tries to apprehend the widest range of possibilities. Pretty much everyone who describes NE agrees on that, because we can see it at the whole type level. We see it with the MPs. The MPs are about possibilities. And something I've come across recently is I finally looked it up, is there is a correlation at the whole type level between MPs and divergent thinking. And I would say NJs and convergent thinking. Now, it is not... Now, there's a bit of a bias towards divergent thinking as being more creative than convergent thinking. But if you look at somebody like J. Michael Straczynski, who I think is an counterphobic 6 INTJ, which is why he has access to Phelan, I believe that convergent thinking and his linear intuition helped him very much in able to plan out a 5-year story arc and have the discipline to stay on task. And so that's convergence for him, and going towards what he saw as the solution, the one singular solution, at least for him. Divergent thinking there is where you get towards a problem where there are many different solutions, divergent solutions. And so this is where it's possible solutions. There's something like that. So, and there is a sort of there's also a lateral side to NE. So you could say the NJs like to hear this. If you're an NP, tell the NJs this. You could say, oh, NE is a mile wide and an inch deep. Because the NJs like to see themselves as being deeper, more narrower but deeper. But NE in its extreme, a mile wide and an inch deep. If someone's sort of, and it can also lead to that sort of dilettantish attitude, as Jung goes on to here. It is a constantly seeking fresh outlets and new possibilities in external life. And then this is where it sounds like a dilettante. If only he would stay put, he would reap the fruits of his labors, but always he must be running after new possibility, quitting his newly planted fields. So we can also see from this that these people, that the way this is described here, these are going to score as P on the MBTI. Divergence, not convergence. And that someone who's NI on the MBTI will score as a J because it's planned out, it's linear, it's that linear intuition of time. See my previous video, my NI video. So now we get to my description of NE, not my definition of NE, my description of NE. Definition is when one is making it up. So Empirical Intuiting, written by yours truly. So these are features of core NE. Seeing the commonalities. We see this at the whole type level, especially NE DOMs, because they're more conversational. And then I would argue this, creating generalizations across situations that SJs like. And SJs do use NE. So, for example, if you compare the Guardian to the Artisan, Guardians value NE, some NE. Artisans value SE. SE is all, SE, Artisan is all about the present situation, the specifics of the present situation. Guardians are about, they look at the present situation and it's, oh, this is like this. This is how we should do it. So in order to get to the shoulds, you have to know what the present situation is like. Oh, this is like this. This is how we should do it. So you've got all of this sort of past experience, these Guardians. And it's this situation is like this kind of experience, this kind of situation. And in this kind of situation, this is what we do. So it's that trans-contextual thinking. It's you are finding the connections between the present situation and your vast storehouse of past situations. So you are using NE in order to do the SI. Now, the instinct there, now why Guardians do that is because that's using NE, finding the commonalities between the present situation and what has worked in the past. Again, I'm not saying that SI is memory. It's a tool. What's the motivation of the Guardian? Safety first, security. We go to what has worked. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's the ethos of Guardians. Or if they are going to improve something, say like Kristen, who's a bit of a creative subtype of creative or harmonizing subtype of ESTJ, what she does is, and she's giving this example, she takes established practices that have worked elsewhere in other contexts and she applies them to the present context. So this is a digression that's on topic. So she's taken a procedure that's worked in a different business and has applied it to the present business, but it's worked. It's tried and tested. And tried and tested by her. So there's that subjective aspect to it. So the point is there, you've got this, what Linda Bones calls the tandem principle. You've got SI working with NE. Whereas SE is about the present situation, the here and now, the specific circumstances. And so SE is more about situational awareness. And so in chaotic situations, SE is the better process. In standard situations, SI is the better process. All right. Yeah. Yeah, I know it creates the generalizations the SJs likes because the SJs are looking for that generalization. that can be trusted, because they're safety first. Again, another feature of any, connecting ideas, situations in a way that can be articulated, debated, because they're right. Then this is how it gets empirical. And so I'm going to go down, and then I'll get back to that. Right. I'll just okay. I'm going to go through this in order, and you'll just remember, in case I miss any bits out, I'm going to go through this in direct order. So I will get to commonalities there and connecting. Right. So generating alternatives. This matches the interaction style. You've got NJ as a directive. Well, if you've got that linear intuition, this is the goal we're going towards. And you've got MPs, it's like, well, we could do this, we could do that, and we could do this. And you've got lots of different opportunities. You're not going to be as directive because you're not sure. It's like, so in interaction style, the MP would say, well, you could do this, or you could do this, or so it's not going to come across as directive. It's going to be come across as various suggestions. And then someone they might ask, well, which one do you think? Well, I'm not really sure because you could do this, you could do that. So it's informing, not directive. So they're better as idea generators, and NJs are better as idea enactors and follow through. Again, this is what we notice at the whole type level. MPs are better at starting projects and idea generation. NJs are better at follow through. As you can see in the type of ENTJ, which is very good as the CEO, the mobilizer, as Cozy would call that role. Yes. That came from Shalina. Any is more than just pattern recognition because it does something once the pattern has been recognized. MPs, these are the any wheelhouse types, are good at generating ideas. So I'm not necessarily saying that any is ideas, just as I don't say that SI is memory. What I'm saying is that the MPs are good at generating ideas. This is what we see at the whole type level. And this is how I'm being empirical in the description. Because, we can, it's like we can be pretty empirical. These people scored as NP. And you can ask them questions and be clever about it and go, okay, yeah, you got NP preferences. You seem to be generating a lot of ideas. Okay, we're going to put this in the definition of any. Because, yeah. Right, so, right, commonalities, that's that first one. Right, just do it like that, just so you know what I'm getting at. Seeing the commonalities. So, yes, Aristotle's Poetics, which were sort of, what we think is that they are lecture notes from students that have been put together because he had the reputation in the ancient world from contemporaries of his writing style was a river of gold. But Aristotle's Poetics is very, very condensed, and it's very easy to misunderstand unless you've read Story by Robert McKee first, because he comes from the school of Neo-Aristotelians, the Chicago school of Neo-Aristotelians, where it's basically a fleshed out poetics. So, and I've written there, in Aristotle's Poetics, it is stated that the ability to create metaphors cannot be taught and is dependent on the perception of similarities. Right. And then we have connecting. I'm going to try to get that on there. And then I'll move it down a bit. Connecting. And then I'll move it down. So connecting ideas, situations in a way that can be articulated, debated, because they're. Right, so connecting. Ray Frensham, in his book, Teach Yourself Screenwriting, on creative thinking. I like to keep it separate. This is where I get the TI assertive. And I start getting, no, that's thinking. That's intuition. Those are separate. Discovering hidden links or relationships between two unrelated things seemingly unrelated to most people. Ideas people no one has seen before. And I think Dario said that random connections, and Linda Barron said they're not random because she's INTP and MP. And Dario said, yes, but everybody else sees it that way. They see it as random. The NPs don't, but everybody else does. Or sometimes it's like, I can see that, but irrelevant. Oh, I'll have something mildly amusing to say about INTPs. So Gregory Bateson, probably INTP, and in probably in an NLP book, Bandler and Grinder wrote about Gregory Bateson, and to me it makes him sound INTP. Simultaneously irrelevant and profound. Right. Dario Nardi, in his Google Authors YouTube video defining cross-contextual thinking. The ability to see patterns and relationships in one situation and match those to many other seemingly very different situations, but where that context still holds. So, not saying this is any, saying that MPs are the best at this kind of thinking. Any wheelhouse types are better. And later on, when I give the example of Douglas Adams, I will talk about when it's any and when it's thinking and how it passes between the different spheres. Now, I just hope that I actually put that bit in. Yeah, I did put that bit in. So we've got 3 panels today for any. Right, so that's going back to the there bit. Connecting ideas, situations in a way that can be articulated, debated, because there. Remember what Carl Jung wrote? But only from the subsequent result can it be established how much of what was seen was actually in the object. Now, it doesn't mean object, because what happens, Carl, if, like Douglas Adams, your stimulus was a sound is not an object. So, stimulus. All right. There. So this is about how NE is empirical. Right. So I got about a page, a large bit on how it's empirical. Right. Here we go. Nardi again. So the empirical part. External stimuli. So that's empirical. External stimuli springboards to generate analogies and ideas. Because somebody outside, someone could record the situation and you got the NP coming up with ideas. And it's like, oh, you got the idea to get that idea from? Oh, I got it from there. Oh, let's play the tape back. What was the idea? Oh, you were watching a judo program. And what did he say? Scroll it back. What's he say? Oh, and the judo person says, what you got to do is you got to use your weight of your opponent against himself. And it's like, ooh, that gave you an idea. How did that give you an idea, that principle? Well, you got to wait until the end of the video, right, that Ben's going to do about it. I don't know how I know about this, but, you know, this is just a subjunctive example. So, springboards to generate analogies and ideas. So, making those connections. Perception of similarities. Thinking will be involved in the rational elaboration of such an idea from its NE kernel. I'm channeling Jung there. I don't mind saying that, but I'll give my sources. But yes, that's what I think. Thinking will be involved in the rational elaboration of such an idea from its NE kernel. Right, so, Jung. So, extroverted intuition is not mere perception. You should have put nor rather than or. Naughty, naughty. That's the translator's problem. Fault. Is not mere perception nor vision, but an active creative process that puts into the object stimulus just as much as it takes out, but only from the subsequent results can it be established how much of what was seen was actually in the stimulus and how much was read into it. Also, you could also use the term percept rather than object, because a sound is a percept, an object of perception. you know, there's too much of a visual bias and tactile bias going towards objects. So that relates to reading potential into the percept that at best only half contains it in the form of potentially useful when combined with other percepts' ideas, properties, or aspects. Right, so I've got a bit INTP there. I'll read it through again. I might read it through 3 times. So that relates to reading potential into the percept that at best only half contains it in the form of potentially useful when combined with other percepts, ideas, properties, or aspects. So you could have this stimulus that has this potentiality in it. Someone sees it 20 years ago or 200 years ago or 1,000 years ago, and they don't see that potential because it's reading that potential into the properties. And it's sort of like rare earth metals. Before you realize that they can be used in different applications. So this other knowledge adds to it in the combination of properties. So it's this potential. It's not really in it; it's read into it. So this idea of can it be established how much of what was seen was actually in the object and how much was read into it, and then the reading into it is part of with the connections. So you could say properties, and it's like all these properties. Oh, they could be used for this, but I need to know about this. And one of the reasons why MPs can do this better than other types is they tend to have this diffuse knowledge base, varied knowledge base. And in order to make the connection between A and B, you need to know about B. So you've got to have a wide knowledge base in order to make the connections. Whereas the NJs are a bit narrower, so the knowledge base isn't as wide. It can be deeper, frequently deeper than MPs. But if you've got that wide knowledge base, then it's like, oh, that's got a property. Oh, that could be used for that. See the connection. But you need to know A and B before you can, or A and C, before you can make a connection between A and C. If you're ignorant about it, then you can't make a connection. All right. So that relates to reading potential into the percept that at best only half contains it in the form of potentially useful when combined with other percepts, ideas, properties, or aspects. So the percept for Douglas Adams is watching a program on judo, and I'll give the context later on. And the guy says, so it's not an object. He says, what you got to do is when you got a heavy opponent coming against you, is you got to use his weight against him. So it's sort of like you're turning a negative into a positive. That's sort of the principle, right? But that's a generalization, though, from use the weight of the opponent against himself. You're then generalizing outwards to have the negative into the positive, the problem into the solution. And that's sort of the kernel of it. And I'll go into more depth later on. So, right. I put a lot of effort into this. The connection is frequently there in hindsight, as Jung wrote. It was just not recognized by many before then. E.g., yeah, this is the thing. This is one of the things I added, that when someone then comes up with that idea, it's like someone who invents something that in a hindsight is, I could have invented that. And then it's like, yeah, but you didn't have the idea. In hindsight, it's flipping obvious. So if it's obvious in hindsight, it's there. It just wasn't seen. So that it was there. So it's frequently there in hindsight. It was just not recognized by many before then. Exactly. It's there, but not recognized. Well, and so you get the reaction of, well, that's obvious. Why didn't someone come up with that or see that before? There's lots of inventions that could have been invented 100 years before or 200 years before. But they weren't. So, and then some examples. A possibility is successfully acted on. Yeah. Because a possibility has to be acted on. Remember what he said, Carl Jung, about acting on possibilities. And if you're the NJs, you're more likely to ignore possibilities that are not part of the plan. Yeah, a connection seen after it has been pointed out. Oh, yeah. I've misunderstood myself. These are example features of how it's empirical, how it's there. These are examples of it where you can say it's there, that it's empirical, that it's extroverting, that it is external. Unlike socionics, which is asinine with its information dichotomies, asinine. All intuition is internal. Oh, right, okay. Well, this NE, if you've got a possibility that is successfully acted on, and then you go through and explain it and examine it, or the connection is made, and after it's been pointed out, and it's like, do you want to discuss this connection? Oh, it's there. It's actually there and empirical and external. It's a bit late. Right. A connection seen after it's pointed out. So, by comedian Richard Jenny. This is a bit like lame, but it's an example. If carrots are so good for the eyes, how come I see so many dead rabbits on the highways? So a refutational connection. All right. Well, you got carotene, I suppose. Anyhow. So in comparison, NI. In comparison, NI on its own for telling the future could be seen as a lucky guess. Right, that's the thing. Empirical versus subjective. When you're looking at this when you're looking at it from the outside to the NE person, and someone does some NE, it's like, well, this is how this is like this. This is the connection. You can go through it and explain it. But if someone's foretelling the future with their NI, then it's like, yeah, it could just be a lucky guess. That's how it's subjective. These are powerful ideas to really taint Carl Jung's ball of extroverting is empirical and introverting is subjective, to take that ball and run with it. And it works. So, NI is especially undercut by clairvoyance frequently being hit and miss and not being able to stand up to scientific testing. I put clairvoyance there, and actually that's the wrong word. It should be something like seers, people with foresight, but clairvoyant isn't actually the right word. Yeah, because clairvoyance isn't foretelling of the future, some other psychic stuff. Yeah, not being able to stand up to scientific testing. But what are empirical occurs is NI-related intelligent roles of directive strategic coordination, NRET. So basically what NTJs are good at with like CEOing and long-term projects, 20-year projects, and directed diplomatic mentoring. Those are empirical. Although even there, NI is only in third. Yeah. As the invisible hand guiding TE and FE respectively. Right, and I'll give you some pages to look at. Please understand me too. In summary, I think it would be easier to convince a psychologist that NE is real than NI is real. It would also likely depend on his Jungian type. And I put her first because most psychologists are female. Just check out the distribution on any psychology course and also any acting course as well. It's probably 2/3 female. Right. NB. It's NPs, lateral intuitors. That's if you really want to get it reduced quick. a quick definition. NP, lateral intuition for NE, linear intuition for NI. Now, it's NPs, lateral intuitors, and SJs, guardians, who value SE. No, they value NE, Ben. SI with NE in guardians. SJs filter for consistency of the present with the past. Why? Safety and security in the familiar. So, model Vaserlan, ESFJ has 5th slot, i.e. tertiary FE. The SI DOMs have 7th slot, i.e. inferior NE. And then I do this bit here where I have a correction. The YouTube videos I did on model Vaserlan used the Mark 1 model, where the inferior slot is ranked 6th and the contrarian alternative ranked 7th. But after I recorded that series of 16 videos, I decided the default situational dichotomy is more important in the counter club than the unvalued dichotomy. This is because the tertiary and inferior are valued less than the dominant and auxiliary, which explains why in the club, which contains the dominant and auxiliary, the dichotomy valued-unvalued remains more important than default situational. To understand, search my channel for ISTJ model Vaserlan. There we go. So, values. This is what we notice at the whole type level with NPs. And so, a description of NE. We're looking at the whole type. So we can say, well, we're modeling these NPs, the function they have in common, NE. So, what we see at the whole type level, it's like, some of this, it's a good idea to put this in this function. We can't see the function, but we can see these, and again, values. If we talk to NPs, they value ideas. So they're coming up with ideas. They're ideating. Now, you might be a certain person on YouTube who goes around saying that she's an ENTP Enneagram 8. Well, if you don't ideate, dear, and you get rattled, and you are probably maybe a counterphobic 6 ENTJ with ADHD, and that's why you score as an ENTP, rather than it all happens late at night, the FI comes out. That's probably why you score as an ENTP, yet hardly having any ideas. And the few ideas that you do have, you sort of grasp onto and jealously guard. Yeah. But real ENTPs having an idea every 5 minutes. And you can see it on the face when they're in the affect display. You can see the light bulb moment going off. And this happens in conversation. Usually what happens with any DOMs, especially ENTPs, is they're in a conversation, get the idea, and they're looking away from the person. It's like, hey, I'm here, you're conversing with me. And it's like, no, the other person is just the starting board for the idea. ENFPs are better at maintaining attention on the other person. So ideas, possibility, chasing those possibilities. The dilettantish. Some Enneagram 7 in there as well. Intellectual fun, exploration. ENFPs, especially ENFP females, love to explore other cultures, go abroad. Optionality. Yeah, that's also an SE value, so likely a P value. Newness, weirdness, originality. Yeah, weirdness. Yeah, they'll like Twin Peaks. ISTPs don't. Originality, looking at the bigger picture, cross-contextual thinking, any humor, such as by Monty Python, Douglas Adams, Robin Williams, and maybe, just maybe, you'll see next year, maybe, Wilma's Housemates. Right then, so if you see page 58 to 59 of the new comedy writing by Jean Perret, it's written about 92, who, actually a bit later than that, maybe about 2002, who seems NTP. Yeah, it does seem NTP. 3 comedy writing skills. This is he on the skill of recognizing relationships and ironies. Most comedy, as I've stated before, is a combination of 2 or more ideas. It's the relationship of these ideas that generates the humor. So me. No. it's the kernel. So it's not just so to me. No, it's just some ideas are very similar. Some are quite different. Some appear to be different, but are really the same, and vice versa. The skillful humorist will discover these relationships. So you've got this sort of relationships and perception of similarities. So to me, that's like NE and TI. Right. Oh, so we're in the final third of this section. Subfunctions. So I adapted this from Victor Galenka's DCNH, and then I threw out the normalizing because I realized that normalizing was just created in order to see Guardians. Again, it's late at night and the FI is coming out. I'm just saying stuff. You're getting FI Ben now. World of possibilities to explore. Actively exploring possibilities. It's assertive. NE and SE can both seem opportunistic. SE would take advantage of, such as Stephen Fry, stealing the credit card from a family friend. Oh, you convicted criminal, you Stephen Fry. Oh, and apparently he was kicked out of boarding schools. Oh, I wonder what he was kicked out of boarding schools for. Right. Actively exploring possibilities. NE and SE can both seem opportunistic. SE will take advantage of opportunities concretely. Someone's left his wallet or eyeglasses. Cross-contextual thinking with TI. And a particular kind of humor, Douglas Adams, creating metaphors based on perception of similarities. Now for the case study. Case study of NEC with TI imaginative, NE creative. Douglas Adams is, so what I do is, when the function is extroverting, then the creative imaginative subfunction is creative. When it's introverting, then the creative imaginative, the creative imaginative subfunction is creative when it's extroverting, and the creative imaginative function is imaginative when it's a subjective function, an introverting function. So Douglas Adams speaking in 1992. All right, okay, case study. Douglas Adams' creation of the Infinite Improbability Drive to solve a problem in his radio series, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And then I happened to be watching a television program about judo, and the instructor was explaining something rather interesting. He said, when you have some sort of huge 18-stone opponent throwing himself at you, the answer is to use the weight of your opponent against himself. So if he's launched himself through the air at you, try to make that his problem rather than your opinion. Yeah, then you got Melvin Bragg interrupts, like, F off. And so I thought, that's flip off. And so I thought, nothing stronger than that. And so I thought, there's something interesting here. That's the bit. That's the NE. It's like, ooh, that's stimulus. That's the stimuli. That's the springboard to the idea. That's that percept. It's like, ooh, there's something interesting here. And then thought comes in. Right, so this is where the NE comes in. He is able to abstract upwards to a broader scale from the principle of use the weight of your opponent against himself to the broader principle of use the weight of the problem against itself. At this broader scale, the elements can be different as long as the relationship between those elements is the same. I actually got that from an NLP book. This NLP book, the one that Dario frequently mentions, by Joseph O'Connor and John Seymour. And Joseph O'Connor may be an NTP, or rather, more accurate, may have NTP preferences. So, the elements can be different as long as the relationship between those elements is the same. So, for example, when Peter Schiff says monetary heroin is the relationship. So, for example, someone being dependent on heroin versus an economy being dependent on low interest rates. So the elements are different, but the relationship is similar. Dependency. All right. And the reason why an economy is dependent on low interest rates is that those low interest rates stimulated borrowing at an adjustable rate. And so those loans can only be paid back at that low adjustable rate. And if interest rates rise, the loans will be defaulted on because the interest will be too high. So Douglas continues. So he was able to extract, use the weight of your opponent against himself. Any, use the weight of the problem against itself. And then he goes into thinking. And then he says, this is Douglas now in white. So I went back to the scene and I thought, what is the problem here? Any answer I come up with as to how they, Arthur and Ford, escape, so they're thrown out into the cosmos, outer space, and he's saying, look, unless they get rescued within 30 seconds, they're going to die. So how do I rescue them within 30 seconds? And all the answers he kept coming up with were highly, highly improbable. What's the problem? Any answer I come up with, how they escape, is basically very, very improbable. And the improbability is the problem. Okay, use that problem, make the problem the solution. Anyway, TI. Idea for the improbability drive. TI trick of creating it out of thin air by use of the finite improbability generator. But then nobody then says, oh, and how do you make a finite probability generator? Well, he then takes the piss by saying, well, if you have an atomic vector blotter hooked up with a sub-meson plane, suspended in a Brownian motion generator, say a nice hot cup of tea, then you can generate finite probability. And such generators we often used at parties to make the hostess's garments simultaneously jump 2 feet to the left in accordance with the theory of indeterminacy. So there's a bit of parody in there as well, metafiction. Right. Like any, this is like, and then any harmonizing like any minus in SHS is looking at percepts ideas from different points of view. The result will pass into the realm of TI-FI for consideration. So you might think, oh, Ben, is that it? Is that the end of the video? Oh, no. Oh, no, no. Oh, no, no. Oh, no. Some of this. Remember what I said before about ideas between A and B? How to make an inference. Background knowledge. Clues from the text. Like I said, to make a connection between A and B, you got to know about B. Good readers piece together clues from the text and filter them through their background knowledge to make inferences. So, again, socionics dichotomy, thinking, being external, a little bit asinine. Because once if you read something in a line, there's a surface meaning, there's an empirical meaning. Say you read a paragraph. You read that same paragraph 5 years later and you get a different meaning out of it. Hang on a minute, how's that possible? Well, it's how semiotics works. There's a subjective component in there, new connections, new interpretations. So if we're saying that language is thinking, well, that means language has a subjective component to it. So that we've got to start doing then, socionics, is when you're defining, this is classical socionics, information socionics. When they start defining thinking as external, it's then, okay, you've got to get rid of language because language has a subjective component to it. People misunderstand each other. People have to look words up in a dictionary. Words in dictionaries themselves have slightly different definitions. People have a different understanding of the word empathy. So, background knowledge, clues from the text. Good readers piece together clues from the text and filter them through their background knowledge to make inferences. So you get that subjectivity in there. There is the empirical component, which enables us to communicate with each other, but there's also that subjective component to a language. Semiologists and semioticians know this. There's the signifier and the signified. Or, as Peirce would say, the representamen. And so the representamen is the word empathy. And then you've got the object which might be like the meaning I'm trying to point towards, and then what you understand by when I say empathy, that's the interpretant, what you interpret it as. But here's the thing, that interpretant is also composed of words that have their own subsequent, that point into other objects and interpretants. And so you've got this empirical aspect to language where we mostly understand what people mean, but there's always that subjective component to it, where people will have slightly different understanding of the words, say, empathy or fairness. What's fair to one person might not be fair to another. For one person's fairness might be equality of outcome. Another person's fairness might be equality of opportunity and a meritocracy versus more egalitarian thing. So that's just the one word, and someone says it, the meaning is, you see what I mean? There's a subjective component there. Interpretation. And just look at, here's an example, people giving different interpretations to Shakespeare. So thinking is not purely external. It has a subjective side. All functions have a subjective side. There's subjective intuiting, there's empirical intuiting, there's subjective thinking, there's empirical thinking, there's subjective sensing, there's empirical sensing, and whatever the fourth one is. Yes, extroverted, empirical feeling, and subjective feeling. Right. Right, so this was a fun moment. This was back in about 2015. And when I gave that example of that Dario gave his definition, so this is Victor, who is closer to Dario than information sociology. Victor does not like, he has a low opinion of information socionics. So this is a young Jack. He's about 32 now. So when Victor said that he agreed with those examples of NE, and it was those a bit like springboards in the cross-contextual thinking, and so, oh, I agree with that. Oh, he didn't have a nice reaction there. That's a photo there. Wasn't pleased. And there's Stephen having a little smile. Right. I was quite pleased by that moment. Right then. So, what do we got? Square melons. So, this was in the caption. No, it wasn't. It was something like this. So, and I did this, and Haley's on there because I was in the video with her when I did this. So, this is the caption I came up with for this. 2 present hungry birthday boys refuse to be deterred by new craze in gift wrap. There we go. So you have to perceive the similarities there. Right. So that is about it. Exit full screen. I don't believe there's another. That just goes back to the beginning. All right. So I usually go back. Is it that? No, it's not that. It's that one. All right then. I'm going to end it now. Oh, a little bit fruity in this live stream.